The T-28 was not a tank. It was actually a self-propelled gun, also known as an assault gun. Instead of mounting the gun in a revolving turret as in a regular tank, the gun was stuck into the front hull, which meant it could only fire to the front. That would have made the T-28 an unusual weapon in the American arsenal. In World War II, the U.S. armored fleet consisted of turreted tanks as well as turreted tank destroyers, essentially tanks with less armor and a more powerful gun. Even the M3 Grant, that misshapen stopgap fighting vehicle, had a turreted 37mm cannon to supplement the 75mm gun fixed in the hull. However, the Germans and Soviets used plenty of assault guns. The advantage of a German Sturmgeschütz 3 or Jag Panther, or a Soviet Su-85 or Su-100, was that they were cheaper to produce than tanks. The turret is an expensive component, while still featuring thick armor and a powerful gun. Removing the turret also made them a smaller and less visible target. The downside was that a fixed gun firing forward meant that to engage targets to the side or rear, the whole vehicle had to pivot in that direction, rather than just swiveling the turret. In a freewheeling mobile battle against other tanks, that inflexibility could prove fatal. But used as ambushers where their low profile made them hard to spot, or to provide fire support for infantry, they were very effective. To Allied foot soldiers who had to face them, whether they were called tanks or self-propelled guns made no difference. The T-28 was different than other US vehicles because it was designed for a specific and specialized task. The US Army had Shermans and tank destroyers aplenty. What it lacked was a weapon to breach German fortifications. What particularly worried American planners was the Siegfried Line, the long chain of pillboxes and bunkers that guarded Germany's western border. A 1943 Ordnance Department study concluded that a heavily armed and armored vehicle would be needed to breach those defenses. The original concept proposed mounting the new 105mm gun T5I in a tank with the equivalent of 8-inch frontal armor using the electric drive system developed for the heavy tank T1E1 and the medium tank T23, according to tank historian R.P. Honeycutt in his book Firepower, A History of the American Heavy Tank. The high-velocity T5E1 gun had excellent penetration performance against concrete and when installed in a heavily armored chassis was expected to be extremely effective in reducing heavy fortifications. The Army finally settled on a 95-ton design with 12 inches of frontal armor. Compare that to the Sherman, which weighed about 30 tons and was protected by around 2 inches of frontal armor. Even the feared King Tiger, which the Germans used in combat, only had about 6 inches of frontal armor. The T-28 was almost 37 feet long from the rear to the tip of the gun, and about 10 feet high. It carried a crew of 4 in the 105mm gun. But for close-range defense against infantry, the T-28 only had a .50 caliber machine gun mounted on the roof, which required the vehicle commander to expose himself to fire it. Not surprisingly, the weight of this vehicle created concerns. Though double the weight of the M26 Pershing, the T-28 used the same engine, which explains its top speed of 8 miles per hour. Even that figure could only be achieved by reducing the T-28's ground pressure through 2 sets of tracks on each side of the vehicle. When traveling on a road, one set of tracks could be removed for greater speed. Finding someone to build a vehicle of this size was another challenge. The Pacific Car and Foundry Company stepped forward, and completed the first T-28 in December 1945. By then, the war had ended, and the initial order for 5 test vehicles had been cut to 2, with the second delivered in January 1946. Slashing the program was probably a good idea, because the Army didn't know what to make of this giant. The vehicle was initially designated the T-28 tank. Then, as only bureaucrats can do, in February 1945 a memorandum from the Chief of Ordnance requested that the T-28 be redesignated as the 105mm gun motor carriage T-95 because the cannon was not turret-mounted and because of its limited secondary armament. In other words, without a turret and some additional machine guns, the vehicle didn't deserve to be called a tank. The heavily armed and armored T-95 did not quite fit any of the usual categories for US Army fighting vehicles, honeycut traits. For example, tanks were expected to carry their armament in fully rotating turrets, and self-propelled guns usually were lightly armored to achieve maximum